The C-130 groaned on its final approach into North Island. Below, the lights of Coronado were a familiar constellation, a promise of peace I hadn't felt in 6 months. I was 2 days early, a ghost returning from the submerged world of the South China Sea. The salt and diesel fumes of the mission still clung to my skin like a second uniform, a scent I was desperate to wash away in my own shower, under my own roof. My cab dropped me at the end of the block, just past 10 at night. I wanted to walk the last 100 yards, to savor the transition from warrior back to wife and mother. But the house was dark, too dark. A single porch light cast long, skeletal shadows from the jacaranda tree. A knot of unease, cold and familiar as a pre-dive check, tightened in my gut. I keyed the lock. The click was unnervingly loud in the stillness. "I'm home," I called into the void. Silence answered. Then, a low whine from the living room. Thor. My German shepherd, my four-legged shadow, padded into the entryway, but he didn't bound into me. He didn't shower me with the usual frantic, happy licks. He just whined, a deep, mournful sound, and nudged my hand with his wet nose before turning his head, insistently, toward the back of the house. My hand went to the kabar I no longer wore on my hip. Old habits. I followed him through the darkened kitchen. Faint music drifted through the sliding glass door, the murmur of voices. My unease curdled into confusion. Through the blinds, I saw them. Ticky torches casting a flickering, hellish light across the lawn. A crowd of people milling around the patio. Our people. Wives from the family readiness group, a few guys from Jake's squadron, our neighbors from down the street. And in the center of it all, illuminated by the flames, was my husband, Jake. His arm was draped around my best friend, Sarah. My blood ran cold. The door slid open with a soft hiss, heads turned. A few gasps. The music faltered, and then a small body launched itself at me. Lily. My arms wrapped around my daughter, burying my face in her hair, inhaling the sweet scent of shampoo and sunshine. This was real. This was my anchor. But her hug was frantic, desperate. She pulled back, her big brown eyes wide with a terror that had no place at a birthday party. She put her mouth to my ear, her breath hot and shaky. "Mommy," she whispered, the words a kill shot, more effective than any bullet. "Daddy said you wouldn't make it back. Aunt Sarah said she's going to be my new mommy." The world tilted. My hearing narrowed to a sharp ringing, just like during a flashbang breach. I looked past Lily's shoulder. Jake's hand on Sarah's waist wasn't friendly, it was an anchor, a claim. Sarah's smile, which I had known since we were plebes at Annapolis, was no longer familiar. It was the victor's smile, and then I saw it, gleaming against her skin, nestled in the hollow of her throat. The soft green glow was unmistakable. My mother's jade necklace. The one passed down 3 generations of Tran women. The one I had given Sarah to hold for safekeeping before my deployment, because I trusted her more than any bank vault. I trusted her with my legacy. She was wearing my life as a trophy. I backed out of the light, pulling Lily with me into the shadows of the kitchen. My hands were shaking. I needed an anchor, a voice of command. I dialed the one number that had always been my bedrock. My father, Master Chief Petty Officer Tran, retired. He picked up on the second ring. "Dad," my voice cracked. "It's Jake. And Sarah." There I couldn't form the words. I told him what I saw, what Lily said, the story tumbling out in a broken mess. I waited for the outrage, the promise to come over, the paternal rage. Instead, there was a long, cold silence on the line. Then his voice, hard as shipyard steel. "Maya, where are you?" "I'm home. In the kitchen, they're all outside." "Dad, what do I do?" "Don't make a scene," he commanded. Not asked, commanded. "You are Lieutenant Commander Maya Tran. You will not cause a public disturbance in front of that community. You handle your family problems like a soldier, not like a hysterical child. Do you understand me? Do not dishonor your name. Or mine." He hung up. The dial tone buzzed in my ear, a final, definitive severing. I was alone, adrift in hostile territory. The laughter from the backyard rose again, a mocking tide. I looked down at Lily, her face buried in my tack pants. My trembling stopped. The emotional fog cleared, replaced by a crystalline, arctic clarity. The pain was still there, a white-hot core, but my training built a containment wall around it. Assess, adapt. Overcome. They had made a critical error in judgment. They thought the woman who baked cupcakes and planned playdates was the only one living in this house. They had forgotten about Valkyrie. And Valkyrie doesn't get hysterical. She gets even. I slid my phone back into my pocket, my movements calm and deliberate. The home front had just become a war zone. And I was an expert in war. The fluorescent lights of the aid station hummed a monotonous, sterile tune, a stark contrast to the chaotic symphony of memory playing in my head. My left hand, wrapped in layers of white gauze, throbbed in time with the buzz. With my good hand, I reached into the pocket of my fatigues, my fingers searching for the one piece of myself that wasn't standard issue. They closed around a small, cool, impossibly smooth shape, the jade dragon. Suddenly, the smell of antiseptic and bleach faded, replaced by the scent of star anise, fish sauce, and the damp San Diego air of my childhood. Little Saigon wasn't just a place on a map, it was a pocket of the world my parents had carried with them across the Pacific. But inside our small house, it felt more like a forward operating base. My father, Master Sergeant Tran, ran our home with the same iron-fisted precision. He ran his platoon. Everything had its place. Boots polished to a mirror shine by the door, homework completed and squared away on the kitchen table by 1800 hours, emotions locked down tight. He was a man carved from granite and discipline, and he was determined to shape me in his image. I remember being 10, my knees scraped raw from a fall during a weekend training run he'd forced on me. The sting brought tears to my eyes. He didn't offer a hand or a word of comfort. He just stood over me, his shadow blocking the sun. "Tears are a weakness, he'd said, his voice a low growl that vibrated with authority. "They're a vulnerability the enemy will exploit. You get up, you push through, you don't show them where it hurts." So I learned to swallow my tears, to pack the pain down deep where no one could see it. I learned to be strong his way hard, unyielding, and brittle. But my real strength came from my mother. Where my father was the storm, she was the deep, quiet earth that endured it. She was a survivor of the fall of Saigon, a woman who had witnessed the world crumble and had rebuilt a new one from the ashes with nothing but memory and will. Her strength wasn't in shouted orders or forced marches. It was in the quiet resilience of her hands kneading dough, in the steady way she stirred a massive pot of pho that would feed the neighborhood, in the stories she told of a city of jasmine and rain that only existed in her past. One evening, just before I shipped out for basic training, she found me cleaning my rifle in the garage, my movements a perfect, cold imitation of my father's. She didn't say a word, just sat beside me on an old crate. The air was thick with the smell of gun oil and my own nervous fear. After a long silence, she pressed something into my palm. It was small, heavy, and cool to the touch. A miniature dragon, intricately carved from a single piece of deep green jade, its tiny body coiled in a pose of defiance and grace. R letter 1D3 and G Kong Bao GEI, letter 1A, DQED stroke, letter 1EA 7U, Con Gai A, she whispered, her voice a soft counterpoint to the harsh world my father had built. "Dragons never bow, my daughter. This is your strength, not your father's anger." She closed my fingers around it. "He taught you how to fight. I am teaching you what to fight for. Remember the dragon. It can fly through storms and dive into the deepest seas. It is powerful, yes, but it is also wise. It bends. It endures." That little piece of jade became my North Star. Through the screaming drill sergeants, the grueling marches, the lonely nights in Afghanistan, where the silence was louder than any explosion, I would hold it. It wasn't a prayer or a magic charm. It was a reminder that my heritage wasn't just the rigid discipline of a master sergeant, but also the unbreakable spirit of a woman who survived a war without ever firing a shot. It was the knowledge that true strength wasn't about never falling. It was about the will to get back up, not with rage, but with purpose. Resilience, not brute force. The memory dissolved, and I was back in the humming quiet of the aid station. The cool jade was a solid anchor in the palm of my good hand. The throbbing in my bandaged one felt distant. I had pushed through, just like my father taught me. But I had held on to what my mother gave me. I had endured. The door to the examination room swung open, cutting through the silence. It was Captain Miller, my company. He stood there for a moment, his face an unreadable mask, the same way my father's used to be when he was about to deliver a verdict. Miller's eyes flicked from my face down to my bandaged hand, then back up. He didn't look pleased. "Sergeant Tran," he said, his voice clipped and devoid of warmth. "We need to talk about what happened out there, and about your future in this unit." I tightened my grip on the jade dragon, its ancient coolness spreading through my veins, a silent promise of a strength he could never understand. "The Pacific Ocean doesn't care about your gender. It's an equal opportunity bastard." I learned that on day 1 of Bode/S, when the surf torture began just before sunrise. The water was a black, churning beast, and it wanted to swallow us whole. The instructors, shadows with bullhorns, barked insults that were carried away by the wind, but the cold that sunk right into your bones and stayed there. "Look at her, boys! Think she can hang?" Instructor Sands sneered, his face a mask of contempt in the dim light. The whispers followed me everywhere. In the chow hall, the barracks, during endless log PT. They weren't just testing a candidate. They were testing the very idea of a woman wearing the trident. Marcus Spartan Cole was the worst. A giant of a man from Texas, built like a brick shithouse with a stare to match. He never said a word to me, but his silence was louder than the instructors yelling. He'd just look right through me, as if I were a ghost already haunting the grinder where I was destined to fail. But they didn't know about my father. They didn't know about the winters in Montana, where he'd make me run drills in the snow until my lungs burned, punishing every shiver with another mile. Pain is a conversation he'd grind out, his breath fogging in the frigid air. You decide when it's over. His cruelty was my armor. During an obstacle course run, my foot slipped on a wet rope. I was dangling, my grip failing. Below me, Marcus grunted, ready to move on. I saw a flash of satisfaction in his eyes, but instead of letting go, I remembered a knot my father had taught me, a brutal, efficient lock-off technique that burned my muscles but held my weight. I hauled myself up, inch by painful inch, and finished the course. I didn't beat Marcus's time, not even close. But when I collapsed at the finish line, gasping, he was standing there. He didn't offer a hand. He just nodded, a barely perceptible dip of his chin. It was more than I'd gotten from anyone. Then came Hell Week, 5.5 days of continuous training with a maximum of 4 hours of sleep total. It wasn't training, it was a managed death. We were cold, wet, and sandy for so long that my skin felt alien. We carried our IBS inflatable boat small everywhere, a rubber coffin that weighed 1,000 pounds by day 3. My mind started to play tricks on me. I saw shimmering oases on the asphalt of the base, heard phantom orchestras in the crashing waves. On day 4, carrying a telephone pole that felt like it was made of lead, my world shrank to the back of Marcus's helmet in front of me. He stumbled. The full weight of the log shifted, crushing down on my shoulder. I screamed, a raw animal sound. The instructors swarmed. "You want to quit, Lieutenant? Ring the bell. Go get a donut and a warm blanket." In that moment, I wanted to. God, I wanted to. But then Marcus, without turning, just growled, "Breathe. Hold the line." His voice was gravel, but it was an anchor. I dug my boots into the sand and pushed. We held the line. We became a team. They gave us a 5-minute phone call later that night. A morale call, they said, a cruel joke. I fumbled with the receiver, my hands shaking so badly I could barely dial. The line connected. I heard my father's gruff hello. I tried to speak, but only a sob came out. I was breaking. I could feel the pieces of myself grinding away into the sand. "Don't you dare quit," he said. His voice cold steel, just as I knew it would be. "You don't have permission to fail." The line felt like it was freezing my ear. I was about to hang up, to give in, when I heard my mother's voice, faint in the background. She must have wrestled the phone from him. "Anna," she whispered, her voice a warm current against the tide of his disapproval. "Remember the dragon, baby girl. The one you drew on your wall. Remember what you wrote underneath it." The memory hit me like a physical blow. A childish crayon drawing of a fierce, green dragon breathing fire. And my clumsy, 7-year-old handwriting beneath. It asterisk, "She flies because she believes she can detastrisc." It wasn't about being strong enough. It wasn't about enduring pain like my father taught me. It was about believing I belonged in the sky in the first place. My time's up, I said, my voice suddenly clear. I love you, Mom. I hung up before either of them could say another word. I walked back to my boat crew huddled in the darkness. The cold was still there. The exhaustion was still a crushing weight, but the fire was back in my belly. Marcus looked at me, his eyes questioning in the faint moonlight. I just shook my head and picked up my oar. Let's go, Spartan. We finished Hell Week. Out of 187 starters, 22 of us stood at the end. Months later, after graduating, we were handed our tridents. The ceremony was a blur. Afterward, Marcus found me on the beach, watching the same waves that had tried to break us. He handed me a beer. You earned this, Dragon Lady, he said, the corner of his mouth twitching into something that might have been a smile. The name had stuck. I took a long sip, the cold liquid a welcome shock. Thanks, Spartan. He stared out at the dark horizon. Good, he said, his voice suddenly low, all humor gone. Because where we're going next, Coronado is going to feel like a goddamn vacation. For years, my world had been confined to the dimensions of a C-130, the cramped interior of a sealed delivery vehicle, or the suffocating dark of some godforsaken compound halfway around the world. Peace was a 4-letter word I only heard in briefings, usually right before we went in to shatter someone else's. Then I met Jake. It wasn't at a formal Navy ball or a base-sponsored BBQ. It was at a dive bar in Coronado, with peeling varnish and the smell of stale beer. A place where no one knew my call sign, and no one cared about the ribbons on my uniform, because I wasn't wearing one. I was just a woman in jeans and a worn-out t-shirt, trying to drown the ghosts in a glass of whiskey. He didn't see a soldier. He saw the exhaustion in my eyes and, instead of asking the usual stupid questions about combat, he slid onto the stool next to me and started talking about the science of yeast fermentation. Jake was a whirlwind of civilian life I'd forgotten existed. He was a businessman, a dreamer with calluses on his hands, not from a rifle grip, but from hauling sacks of malt and tinkering with stainless steel vats. He was building a craft brewery from the ground up, a wild and optimistic venture that seemed almost laughably naive to my hardened worldview. He was everything my father, the Admiral, was not. Where my father saw a legacy to be forged in fire and blood, Jake saw a person. He admired my strength, but he wasn't infatuated by the warrior. He was fascinated by the woman who endured it. He was patient. He understood the nights I woke up thrashing, the phantom scent of cordite in my nostrils. He never pushed for details of the ops I couldn't talk about. Instead, he'd just hold me, his solid, warm presence a bulkhead against the tide of memories. He learned the geography of my scars, both the visible ones and the deeper kind, and traced them not with pity, but with a reverence that felt like healing. We built a life on that quiet peninsula, surrounded by the constant, comforting rumble of Navy life, but detached from its demands. The roar of F-18s taking off from North Island became the soundtrack to our morning coffee. Our house was small, smelling of sea salt and the sweet, hoppy aroma from his brewery taking shape in the garage. We'd host BBQs in the backyard, his civilian friends mingling with a few of my trusted teammates. I watched them, these men who had been through hell with me, laughing as they tried to explain to a software engineer what a no-light, no-noise insertion felt like, and failing. For the first time, I saw the chasm between my two worlds, and I felt a pang of hope that I could actually build a bridge across it. Jake was that bridge. Then came Lily. Holding my daughter for the first time was a surrender more terrifying than any firefight. This tiny, screaming, perfect human being knew nothing of Valkyrie, the breacher. The cold-eyed operator who could hold her breath for 4 minutes and make impossible shots in the dark. She just knew the woman whose heartbeat was her first home. In her, I saw a future I'd never dared to map. I was no longer just a weapon pointed at the enemies of the state. I was a mother. I was Maya. It felt like I was finally shedding a skin I had worn for so long I thought it was my own. The Admiral disapproved, of course. A phone call, clipped and cold. informed me that starting a family was a strategic distraction. But his voice sounded distant now, the signal weak and full of static, unable to penetrate the walls of the life I was building. I truly believed I had finally achieved escape velocity from his orbit, that I had constructed a fortress of normalcy he could never breach. One evening, a little after 9, the California sky was a perfect, deep indigo. Lily was asleep upstairs, her soft breathing a gentle rhythm through the baby monitor. Jake and I were on the porch, nursing 2 of his latest creations, a smooth, dark stout. The air was cool, the moment perfect. His phone buzzed on the table between us. He glanced at it, and for a sliver of a second, the easygoing smile on his face vanished. It was a flicker, so fast anyone else would have missed it. But I didn't. I saw the sudden tension in his jaw, the way his eyes darted to me before looking back at the screen, a micro-expression of guarded calculation. It was the same look I'd seen on men reading intelligence before a high-risk op. "Work stuff?" I asked, keeping my voice light. He forced a relaxed smile, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Yeah, just a supplier issue. Nothing to worry about." He typed a quick reply, his thumb moving with a deliberate calm that felt practiced. He slid the phone back into his pocket, face down. He changed the subject, talking about plans for the weekend, but I wasn't really listening anymore. The safe harbor I'd so carefully constructed suddenly felt like it was built on a sandbar at low tide. The man who was my anchor, my opposite, my peace, had just lied to me. I knew it with the same bone-deep certainty I knew the feel of a trigger. And in that quiet, starlit moment, as I watched the face of the man I loved, the part of me I called Valkyrie stirred in the depths, awake and listening. The war, I realized, might not have been left behind after all. It may have just followed me home. The deployment dragged on, each day melting into the next under the relentless Kandahar sun. Time here was measured not in clocks but in patrols, in letters sent, in the dwindling supply of decent coffee. My world had shrunk to the sand-colored walls of the FOB, the weight of my gear, and the familiar faces of my squad. It was a simple, brutal existence, and for a while it was enough. The chaos here was a known quantity. The chaos back home was a different beast entirely. When Sarah's marriage imploded, it felt like a grenade had gone off in my own life. When she called me sobbing, a little past midnight my time, my first thought was to get her on a plane to us, to our home. When she suggested moving in to help Jake with Lily in the brewery while she got back on her feet, I felt a wave of profound relief. "Of course," I'd said, my voice thick with static and emotion. "Your family. Jake and Lily need you. I need you to be there." It seemed perfect. My best friend, the sister I'd chosen, would be there to hold down the fort. My 2 favorite people, protecting our little world. The first few weeks were fine. I got cheerful updates. Photos of Lily and Sarah baking cookies, reports of a new IPA tap at the brewery. But then, an undercurrent began to pull. The weekly video calls with Jake grew shorter. He was always tired, always on his way out the door. "Things are crazy with the expansion, Alex," he'd say, the camera jiggling as he walked through the brewery. I'd catch glimpses of new fermenters, of pallets of grain, but rarely a clear look at his face. Lily's voice, a sweet and distant melody in the background, became a painful reminder of the distance. "Daddy has to go, sweet pea," he'd murmur, not to her, but to me. The screen would go black before I could even say "I love you." Then came the money. During a rare quiet evening, with connectivity strong enough to do more than send a quick email, I logged into our joint bank account. My heart seized. A 5-figure withdrawal, dated 2 weeks prior. Labeled brewery equip emergency. My combat pay, the extra hazard stipends I meticulously saved, was hemorrhaging out. I scrolled down. Another, then another. The justifications were vague, the amounts staggering. I felt a cold dread creep up my spine, a fear more potent than any I'd felt on patrol. This wasn't the clean fear of an IED, it was a slow, sickening poison. I waited until just before sunrise my time to call, knowing it would be late afternoon for him. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Jake, I was looking at the accounts. What are these withdrawals?" "We didn't talk about this." Silence. Then a heavy sigh, laced with an irritation that stung more than any shout. "Alex, I'm handling it. We got an opportunity to buy out a competitor's equipment for pennies on the dollar. It was a now or never deal. I had to move fast. You had to move our entire savings." Without a word to me, his voice hardened. "You think it's easy over here? Juggling a kid, a business, everything, while you're off playing soldier. I'm trying to build our future, the one you're supposedly fighting for. The least you could do is trust me." The words hit their mark, twisting the pride I took in my uniform into a weapon against me. "You're married to the core, Alex. We both know it. Someone has to be married to our life." He hung up. I stood there in the pre-dawn chill of the desert, the phone feeling like a cold, dead stone in my hand. He had never spoken to me like that. Never. The final signal flare went up a week later. I was aimlessly scrolling through social media, a desperate attempt to feel connected to a world that was slipping through my fingers. And then I saw it. A new post from Sarah. The photo was bright, painfully cheerful. There was Jake, smiling wider than I'd seen in years, with Lily perched on his shoulders, her face sticky with what looked like ice cream. Beside them, tucked into Jake's side with a familiar ease, was Sarah. They were standing in front of the Disneyland castle. It was the caption that stopped my breath. My perfect little family. My vision tunneled. It wasn't just the words. It wasn't just the lie of his being too busy, too stressed. It was what Sarah was wearing. A soft, gray cashmere sweater with a slight fray on the left cuff. My sweater. The one Jake had bought me for our first anniversary, the one I lived in on lazy Sunday mornings. She was wearing my life. And as I stared at the screen, the cheerful noise of the bass around me faded to a dull roar. The enemy wasn't thousands of miles away. The breach was in my own home. The last of the porch lights from next door blinked off a little after 10. Our own yard was a graveyard of Lily's birthday party, half-empty bags of chips, abandoned red Solo cups collecting dew, and the faint, sweet smell of citronella and defeat. I moved with the practiced economy of a soldier clearing a position, stacking plates, consolidating trash, my face a mask of polite exhaustion I'd worn for hours. But beneath it, a pressure was building, the kind you feel in the air just before the sky cracks open. The whispers had been the first volley. I'd caught them from the other Navy wives near the keg. Snippets of conversation that died the moment I approached, smiles that didn't reach their eyes. They looked at Sarah, then at Jake, then at me, a triangle of pity and morbid curiosity. I knew that look. It was the same one they gave the woman whose husband's ship had a comms blackout for too long. They were watching a casualty, and for the first time, it was me. When the last guest's taillights vanished down the street, the silence in the house was louder than the forced laughter had been. Jake was at the sink, aggressively scrubbing a serving platter. Sarah was gathering her purse, her movements unnaturally slow, a predator reluctant to leave its kill. "Don't," I said. My voice was low, flat, the command voice I used when a situation was about to go sideways. Both of them froze. They turned. Jake's face was a mixture of guilt and defiance. Sarah's was a carefully constructed mask of concern. "Maya, what is it? Are you okay?" "I'm going to ask you both a question," I continued, my gaze moving from my husband to the woman I considered my sister. "And you're going to give me the courtesy of the truth. What's going on between you?" The air thickened, became hard to breathe. For a moment, they just stared, caught in the crossfire. Then, the denial I expected never came. Instead, the enemy lines broke and they charged. It was Jake who spoke first, slamming the platter onto the counter with a crack that echoed in the silence. "What's going on? Life is going on, Maya! I'm here. Every day. I'm coaching Lily's soccer team, I'm fixing the fence, I'm going to the damn neighborhood barbecues. I need a wife here. Maya, not a ghost who shows up twice a year with a new scar and a 1,000-yard stare." Each word was a piece of shrapnel. A ghost. That's what I was to him. Not a sailor, not a senior chief protecting sea lanes, but a phantom haunting our own home. My breath hitched, but I held my ground. Then came Sarah. The tears started, perfectly timed, glistening on her cheeks under the kitchen light. "I didn't want this to happen," she whispered, her voice breaking with practiced sorrow. "He was so lonely, Maya, and you were gone. I was just trying to help, to be there for him, for Lily. I couldn't help who I fell in love with." couldn't help it. The ultimate excuse of the weak and the selfish. The betrayal was so profound, so absolute, it felt like a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. She hadn't just taken my husband, she had used my absence, my service, my very sacrifice as her justification. And that's when I heard it. A tiny, choked sob from the top of the stairs. We all looked up. Lily was standing there, her small frame silhouetted by the hallway light, clutching the stuffed bear I'd sent her from Bahrain. Her face was a mess of tears and confusion. She ran down the stairs, not to Jake, not to Sarah, but to me, burying her face in my legs, her small body trembling. I knelt, wrapping my arms around her. "Lilybug, what's wrong? What did you hear?" She looked up, her eyes wide with a fear no 7-year-old should ever know. Her words tumbled out between sobs. A confession that shattered whatever was left of my world. "Auntie Sarah, she said I had to be extra nice to her. And to Daddy. She said if I made them sad, Mommy wouldn't come back from her dangerous job." The air in my lungs turned to ice. My blood ran cold. I looked up from my daughter's terrified face to theirs. They hadn't just had an affair. They had taken my daughter's deepest fear, the fear of losing me, and they had twisted it into a tool of emotional blackmail. They had manipulated my child with the threat of my own death. The tactical calm I'd relied on in a firefight descended over me. I scooped Lily into my arms, her small weight a fragile anchor in the storm. I walked past them without a word, took her upstairs, and rocked her to sleep, humming the same sea shanty my father used to sing to me. Sometime past midnight, when the house was finally still, I made one phone call. My father, the retired admiral. I laid out the facts with clinical precision, the affair, the emotional manipulation of his granddaughter. I waited for the fury, the support, the rallying cry. Instead, there was a long, heavy sigh on the other end of the line. "Maya, you know how this looks. The Navy community is small. A divorce, an affair, it creates talk. Think of the family's reputation. Think of your career. We need to handle this quietly." I hung up the phone without saying goodbye. The last line of defense had crumbled. I was on an island, surrounded. Jake's words echoed in my head, a ghost. But he was wrong. Ghosts haunt the past. I was a soldier, stranded behind enemy lines in my own home, and a soldier's only job is to find a way to fight back. The grief froze, then crystallized into something hard and sharp. The soldier took over where the wife and mother had shattered. There was no more time for tears. This was a battle space. My home was an occupied zone. My daughter was a hostage. In the quiet dark of my temporary quarters, a little after midnight, I declared my own war. I named it Operation Dragon's Tooth. The first call was to Marcus Spartan Cole. He picked up before the second ring, his voice a gravelly rasp that always sounded like it was coming over a field radio. "Talk to me, Jess. I need a lawyer, Spartan. Not a jag. A shark. Someone who understands our world but operates in theirs." He didn't ask why. That's the beauty of our brotherhood. We don't ask for the backstory when a soldier needs fire support. "Got it," he said. "Ava Chen, former Marine, 1st Recon. They call her the Hammer. She eats civil suits for breakfast. Sending you her number now. Watch your 6. The line went dead. Ava Chen turned out to be exactly as advertised, a bulldog in a tailored suit who listened to my story without a flicker of emotion, her eyes assessing me like a target package. When I was done, she simply nodded. "Evidence. We need uncontestable proof. Financials, communications, anything to establish intent and execution." That was my part of the mission. Intelligence gathering. A few nights later, under the cloak of a moonless sky, I returned to the house I once called home. This wasn't a homecoming, it was a tactical infiltration. Using skills honed in places I could never mention, I slipped inside. The house was silent. They were at the brewery, celebrating some new distribution deal funded by my combat pay. My blood money. Jake's laptop was on his desk. His password was a joke, Lilipad 2021. The contempt I felt was a physical sickness. Breaching his firewalls was easier than dismantling a field-stripped M4. I moved through his digital life like a ghost, cloning hard drives, accessing cloud accounts. And there it was. A meticulous, cold-blooded conspiracy laid out in spreadsheets and email chains between him and Sarah. They had funneled my direct deposits into a separate account, using the money for the brewery's down payment on new steel tanks. They had hired a lawyer months ago, forging my signature on documents that diluted my 50% ownership stake down to nothing. But the deepest cut, the one that took my breath away, was the custody file. They had built a case painting me as an unstable, violent veteran. A local psychologist's report diagnosed me with acute and violent PTSD, citing my unsuitability as a mother. The evidence? Fabricated stories, twisted half-truths, and quotes from my own daughter. My heart stopped. How could they get Lily to say those things? Then I remembered the grizzly guard teddy bear I'd sent Lily from Kandahar, the one with a little voice recorder in its paw so I could send her messages. I'd told Jake to change the batteries for her. A cold dread washed over me. I had activated my own tracking device on its location. It was still in her room. I retrieved it, my hands shaking. The last recording wasn't my voice. It was Sarah's, coaching my daughter. The mediation was held in a sterile conference room that smelled of weak coffee and desperation. Jake and Sarah sat opposite me, their lawyer looking smug. My father was there at their request, to be a family support character. He sat in a corner, his face an unreadable mask of stone. He hadn't spoken a word to me since I'd arrived. Iva Chen began. She didn't raise her voice. She simply laid out the truth like a series of landmines. First, the bank statements, tracing my combat pay directly to the brewery's accounts. Jake went pale. Next, the forged ownership documents, presented alongside a sworn affidavit from a forensics expert. Sarah's confident smirk began to falter. Then, Iva placed a small digital recorder on the polished table. And finally, she said, her voice dropping, "We have the matter of the custody claim, based on the allegation that my client is a danger to her child." She pressed play. Lily's small, innocent voice filled the suffocating silence. Mommy Sarah said I have to tell the doctor that Mommy Jessica yells a lot, that she gets scary eyes, and that she's broken from playing army. There was a pause, then Sarah's saccharine voice, "That's right, sweetie. You're being so brave and helping keep everyone safe." The color drained from Sarah's face. Jake looked like he was going to vomit. My father, who had been a statue, flinched. It was the first crack I'd seen in his armor. His eyes met mine, and for a second, I saw not disappointment, but something that looked terrifyingly like shock. I leaned forward, my voice calm and low, the way it gets just before an operation goes live. "Here is my counteroffer. It is not negotiable. You will sign over the house to me. Free and clear. You will sign over sole legal and physical custody of Lily to me, effective immediately. You will relinquish any and all claims to the brewery. Your names will be wiped from the business entirely. In exchange for your complete and immediate compliance, this evidence package will not be forwarded to the U.S. Attorney's Office for federal fraud and conspiracy charges." Silence. Thick, heavy, and absolute. I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor. "You have until 5 this afternoon to sign." As I walked to the door, my father stood up too. He didn't look at Jake or Sarah. He looked directly at me, his gaze as cold and clear as it was the day I graduated from basic. "You did what you had to do," he said, his voice flat, devoid of warmth or pride. Objective secured. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't praise. It was a tactical assessment. And standing there, in the quiet of my victory, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning, a cold that sank deeper than any Afghan winter. The finality of it felt like a controlled demolition. I signed the papers for the house, then the brewery. My whole life, the one I'd tried to build over the bones of the old one, dismantled in a few strokes of a pen. There was no sadness, just the clean, sharp relief of a necessary amputation. The phantom limb of my former self would ache, I knew, but the infection was gone. I packed what mattered into my truck, 2 duffel bags, a box of photos, and Lily. We found a small, salt-bleached cottage in a town so quiet you could hear the fog roll in. Our days fell into a new rhythm, dictated by the tides, not by mission clocks or brewing schedules. We walked the beaches, collecting shells and sea glass, letting the cold Pacific wash over our feet. For the first time since I'd come home, the silence wasn't filled with ghosts. It was filled with the sound of waves and Lily's laughter. I was learning to breathe again, not the controlled, tactical breathing of a sniper, but the deep, slow pull of someone who was no longer drowning. My father showed up late one afternoon, unannounced as always. He stood in the doorway of our tiny house, a titan in a world built for mortals. His dress blues looked out of place against the peeling paint and sandy floors. He surveyed the small space, the mismatched furniture, the seagrass baskets filled with Lily's toys. His gaze was a physical weight. "So this is it," he said. It wasn't a question. We sat on the porch, the silence stretching between us, taut as a tripwire. I didn't offer excuses or justifications for my new life. I just waited. He was the one who had crossed the state to find me. Finally, he turned to me, his weathered face etched with something I couldn't decipher. It wasn't the usual disappointment or the stern judgment I had braced myself for my entire life. It was something closer to astonishment. "You handled it," he said, his voice a low rumble, rough like gravel. Just those 3 words. A decade ago, that sentence would have been my salvation, the validation I'd bled for in deserts and mountains halfway around the world. Now, sitting there, with the smell of the ocean in the air and the sound of my daughter humming inside, I felt a profound calm settle over me. I gave him a small, simple nod. I didn't need his absolution anymore. The battle for his approval was over, and I hadn't even realized I'd won by simply walking off the field. The real healing wasn't in that moment of paternal recognition. It came in the quiet, mundane minutes with Lily. One evening, as a sliver of moon hung over the dark water, she came to me with a drawing, her brow furrowed with the intense concentration of a 5-year-old. It was a crayon masterpiece of vibrant chaos. In the center was a huge, magnificent dragon, scales of green and gold, breathing not fire but a swirl of purple stars, and on its back, a small figure with a wild mane of brown hair, arms outstretched, soaring above the clouds. "That's you, Mommy," she said, pointing a sticky finger at the dragon. "And that's me. We're flying." I stared at the drawing, at the fierce, protective beast she saw when she looked at me. For years, I had felt like a monster, a creature of fire and destruction that I kept chained in the dark. But she didn't see the monster. She saw a guardian, a mother. Her truth was stronger than all my ghosts. A week later, the call came, an offer from the command. Shore duty, a slot as a Bada/S instructor back at Coronado. My first instinct was a visceral no. Go back to the forge, to the place that had hammered me into a weapon and nearly melted me down for scrap. The thought of the cold surf, the endless grinder, the manufactured misery it made the scars on my soul ache. But then I thought of Lily's drawing. Of the dragon. I wasn't going back to be an operator. I was going back to teach. To stand on that grinder not as a candidate shivering in the surf, but as the one who decides when the surf has taught its lesson. I could teach them how to shoot, how to navigate, how to survive Hell Week. But maybe, just maybe, I could also teach them something more. How to carry the weight without breaking. How to come home. That afternoon, I called them back and accepted the post. The morning of our departure, I woke Lily just before sunrise. We walked out onto the empty beach, our bare feet sinking into the cold, damp sand. The air was still and tasted of salt. I knelt in front of her and pulled a small velvet pouch from my pocket. Inside was a dragon, intricately carved from a single piece of dark green jade, its body coiled in a timeless symbol of power and protection. I fastened the cord around her neck. "He looks like your picture," she whispered, touching the cool stone with reverence. I smiled, my throat tight. "Our strength, little bird," I told her, my voice steady. "It's not about being unbreakable. It's knowing that the tide will always change, that storms will come, but we'll still be standing right here when the sun comes up." We sat together, wrapped in an old army blanket, and watched the first sliver of gold break across the Pacific. The light spilled over the water, chasing away the last of the shadows, revealing a new horizon, clean and vast and peaceful. My war was finally over.